Okay, let's get to the big news of the weekend, which is a partial for 4 guys involved in this particular federal case. 2 of them acquitted outright. 2 of them, the jury, it was a hung jury for them, so the judge declared a mistrial, and they will face a new trial, apparently. But this, of course, is related to the so-called kidnapping plot against Gretchen Whitmer, busted up in the fall of 2020.
This was such great news this week.
Well, I described it at the top of the show as kind of a shocking turn of events. I say shocking not because it isn't right. I believe that it is based on my understanding of the facts, but because I never expected the FBI to lose. And
me neither, yeah.
As far as I can tell, not one of the Michigan militia members accused of plotting to kidnap Whitmer has been convicted on a single charge other than the guys who flipped.
Yeah, yep.
Nobody has gone to trial and been convicted yet, unless I'm missing something. But the 2 defendants, Daniel Harris and Brandon Caserta, were both acquitted outright, found not guilty on all charges. For 2 other defendants, Adam Fox and Barry Croft, jurors could not reach a verdict, and so the judge declared a mistrial. The charges were conspiracy to commit the plot and then weapons charges related to explosives, the explosives they were trying to obtain. One of the men who was acquitted, I think it was Harris, also had an illegal short barrel rifle charge that he's been acquitted on now. So that was the other weapons charge. But recall these explosives, that was when they were in the car driven by a Fed to go get the explosives from a Fed when the whole thing was busted up.
Yeah.
And this was October 2020. So and then the other interesting thing here, Fox, he's the guy on he's the guy 3rd from the left or 2nd from the right, the guy with the shorter beard in your frame there. He was actually recruited into the group by Dan the Fed, the guy who was the federal informant for months on end, and the guy recruiting people and then buying all sorts of gifts and trips and hotel stays. So one of the worst members of the group, as far as the federal government is concerned, was recruited into the group by the federal informant.
Yeah.
At the encouragement of the FBI.
I love that the jury was like, no. They orchestrated every aspect of this.
Let me grab the story here. I forgot to put it in my notes, but BuzzFeed was on BuzzFeed of all people was on top of this last summer with a lengthy piece. And if you're interested in the story, you can go revisit it. But this broke down all of the Fed involvement from the inception. Do you just have a summary of how this went?
It's not a short summary.
Yeah,
I don't know. I think that this is really important because Feds are infiltrating. I know people that are on YouTube that have had Feds infiltrate their groups. And so I think people need to really listen to strangers around them that are trying to encourage them to join any kind of militia or to do anything like that. You know, maybe my mom is right. There are just Feds everywhere. Everyone's a Fed. So this Iraq war veteran in the group, this was they're not their Telegram group, but they were in some sort of group chat. He said, everybody down with what's going on? And then somebody else said, if you're not down with the thought of kidnapping, don't sit here. I don't know how anybody fell for this. So the FBI, of course, had been following all of this. And then for 6 months, this Iraq war vet, he'd been wearing a wire. He had been gathering hundreds of hours of recording. He obviously wasn't the only one. There was this biker who traveled from Wisconsin to join the group. He was an informant.
Yeah.
And then the man who'd advised them on where to put the explosives, he was an informant. He was undercover FBI agent, actually. And so was a man in one of the other cars who said very little. He said almost nothing. He went by the name Mark. So there were at least 12 confidential informants who assisted this investigation. It was a huge investigation. And then they even, I can't believe BuzzFeed covered this, but some of the informants played a far larger role than was reported by any other news outlet. Rather than BuzzFeed, here we are. And they did more than just passively observe and report on the actions of the other suspects. They had a hand in every single part of this, including its inception. So this was dreamt by the FBI. And then the extent of their involvement, I mean, their hands were in every single part of the planning and execution of this.
If you read the full story from BuzzFeed too, the FBI's involvement over the months from the spring to the fall of 2020 caused several of the original members to quit because they thought it was getting too ridiculous. And to fill the numbers, Dan the Fed, this Iraq war veteran who had been the leading federal informant, had been recruiting new members like Adam Fox to make up for the numbers that they were losing because of their own Fed extremism over time.
Dan the Fed is this Iraq war veteran.
Yes. Okay. Dan the Fed is the main Fed informant who is
Fed.
Yeah, and you read through the story. They paid for them to travel to conferences and to travel to do all these trainings. And they led them on scouting missions to go surveil Gretchen Whitmer's property and all this. And then the thing in this story too, I see you have in the notes. I know Dan the Fed made something like $50,000 in cash, in compensation in cash and other like cars and things that he was given. He basically had a full-time job with the FBI for just doing their bidding.
So this is in the BuzzFeed article too. This is just so shocking to me. Between 2012 and 2018, the FBI spent an average of $42 million a year on payments to confidential informants, which it officially calls confidential human sources. And this is from an audit from the Justice Department's Inspector General. So we know it's true.
So they're paying Dan the Fed, who's, this Iraq war vet, I gather something of a younger guy. They're offering him all sorts of incentives to work for them. He, in turn, takes all that money and offers incentives to these would-be terrorists he's grooming and takes them on all sorts of trips. Not just as a matter of ideology, it's questionable there. Would something like this plot have happened were it not for the idea planting of the FBI, but just as a matter of resources? Just the tens of thousands of dollars that were poured into this to create it anyway. You read through the plot that happened. On the day they were all busted, again, it's Dan the Fed driving a van with a few of these guys and another undercover agent in the van. And they're going to meet their explosives supplier, who is also a Fed. I forget if he's an informant or an undercover agent, but he's a Fed operative. And they're supposed to pay this guy $4,000 for the explosives. They show up, and among all the alleged terrorists that we busted up, they had something like $200 or $300 among them. So they had this whole plan to bring four grand to buy C4. And yet they show up and nobody even has the money. And then they all get arrested. And the rest is history. But as far as the jury's deliberation and the decision, the jury was 6 men and 6 women. And they deliberated starting Monday and they ended on Friday. Now, because Harris and Caserta were acquitted, they walked free. Fox and Croft remain in custody because the hung jury means their cases remain unresolved.
Yeah.
Noticeably absent from this CBS coverage is the word entrapment, but that was the case of the defense team, that all 4 men were party to a plot that was designed and enacted by feds, and were it not for the feds, none of this would have happened. Now, Harris and Fox were in the Fed van at the time of the explosives pickup and were arrested. Caserta was arrested elsewhere the same evening. Croft wasn't even in the same state. He was in New Jersey, but was arrested nonetheless. Now, it's undisputed, obviously, that the supposed explosives pickup, and by extension, the kidnapping plot, was enacted. Mm. So if the jury accepts that it was happening, and these men don't dispute being there, which they don't, how does the jury reach a not guilty verdict, or inconclusive in the case of the hung jury? Because it was entrapment. Yet you won't see that in this story at all.
You won't see that word, yeah.
Caserta's
Did you
lawyer,
see it in any of your research?
Some did. Some, just not this CBS one. But you have to understand that is the jury's reasoning. It's the only reasoning by which they could reach this not guilty verdict. Caserta's lawyer said outside the courthouse, "What the FBI did was unconscionable. To me, this was a signal. A rogue FBI agent trying to line his own pockets with his own cybersecurity company, pushing a conspiracy that just never was going to be. Our governor was never in any danger." And I think the jury, they didn't get all of it, but they smelled enough of it. And that's another interesting angle, as I'll get to in a minute. The exonerating evidence was not even fully presented. It sounded like the prosecutors really had their way as far as what evidence was admissible and what evidence was excluded. But as I mentioned, Fox remains in custody. But just a reminder on that, one of the guys who the jury could not reach a decision on, Adam Fox, he's the guy that Dan the Fed recruited into the group.
This is so absurd.
The U.S. Attorney's Office in Grand Rapids says they intend to retry Fox and Croft. So they're still in custody, and I guess will face a new trial. Now, I was curious what happened to the others because, of course, there were 14 charged. 6 were charged federally, 8 charged with state charges. The state cases, as far as I can tell, remain ongoing. In this federal case, 2 others have already pleaded guilty. As far as I can tell, the guilty pleas are the only convictions secured in any of the cases so far. Yeah. So what actually happened with these guys who pleaded guilty? Do you know if their cases were different or why they would do this? Was it just trying to get ahead of it?
Well, I think that they were more susceptible to the threats from the FBI, that they were going to get the book thrown at them. So the only 2 people that pled guilty were Ty Garbin and Caleb Franks. And Garbin was the one that drove to surveil Whitmer's house.
Okay.
And then he agreed to cooperate with the Justice Department. Rat bitch. And then this other guy, Caleb Franks, he picked up a gun charge this April and he flipped. So Garbin was sentenced to over 6 years in prison on Wednesday. And then he made this groveling apology to Whitmer about how he scared her and she must have been so frightened and blah, whatever.
Wait, that wasn't this Wednesday, was it? Wasn't that previously?
That was from the CBS article, actually.
Oh, maybe it was more recent than that. In any case, it doesn't matter.
Excuse me. Caleb Franks, he pled guilty in February, said he had lied to the FBI because he feared going to jail. And then he made some statement about how he was trying to commit suicide by cop. And then he agreed to cooperate with prosecutors with the hope that he would get a lighter sentence in June. So I assume his sentencing is in June. The difference between these cases and the previous cases, these guys bailed. I mean, they both look like huge pussies. Did you see their pictures?
I don't have them handy, unfortunately.
They were like, oh no, the FBI is going to come after me and blah, 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 blah. And everybody else just stood strong. And now they're fine.
As we were talking about at the top of the show, the great irony of flipping for leniency, but then ending up with a drastically worse outcome than the guys you flipped on. Yeah. Not a good play. However, if you're dealing with the feds, I get it. If I was predicting how this was going to go, I didn't think that that the feds would get none of their guys except for the ones who admit their guilt. But
yeah.
Okay, Whitmer's office has responded as well. She released a statement. She said what?
The plot to kidnap and kill a governor may seem like an anomaly. Is it an anomaly in this day and age? Like, it's more shocking that this wasn't a true kidnapping and murder for hire plot with the way she's behaved. But we must be honest about what it really is, the result of a violent, divisive rhetoric that is all too common across our country. There must be accountability and consequences for those who commit heinous crimes. Without accountability, extremists will be emboldened. You know who's the extremist? She is. What about accountability for women in government that shouldn't be, that put us through these COVID restrictions, that destroyed families and incomes and the ability of children to recognize facial expressions? This fucking bitch.
Yeah. Tell me more about extremism. Lady who aggressively prosecuted a small town old man barber for the great crime of cutting hair against your decree.
I know.
Yeah. But they just stick with this narrative. Biden and the rest of them are doing the same thing. Well, we got to hold extremism accountable. No, that's the point. You made the extremism. And I don't mean you just inspired it through your own extremism. I mean, you literally manufactured the extremism where it didn't exist without your direct involvement. That was the conclusion of the jury.
Right. But if this were an organic process, would it even be classified as extremist? I would classify it as reactionary. I don't think that these people, in the light that they were painted in, which isn't even true, in the absence of FBI involvement, even committed some kind of heinous, treasonous crime.
Well, I guess
committing treason. Whitmer, people in the federal government.
I guess the point that you're making is by this definition, or at least we approach a situation in which the American patriots of the Revolutionary era would have been called extremists by the same reasoning. Yep. Standing up for their rights against a tyrannical overreach.